narcissists can feel regret, but it doesn't translate into action.
Mm.
They can regret until the cows come home and they don't change.
Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where Elizabeth and I hate your parents for you. I am Megan Caper, and I am a medical intuitive and healer, as well as an occupational therapist.
And I am Elizabeth Malmed. I'm a psychotherapist and a multimedia artist.
And we are cousins.
Yep.
Yay!
Yay, we're cousins.
One of the only family members I actually cheer.
Yes, Woo! So today, before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out about gender, right? Because the name of our podcast is How to Be a Terrible Daughter. But even though we did a whole thing about who this podcast is not for, all genders are welcome here. And, we were trying to think of something a little bit more inclusive, but I think that there's something very specific about not being a terrible daughter necessarily, but I think that both of us were called that.
Yeah.
And so it has like a very specific sting. And actually for me, because I'm non-binary, it actually has another layer because it's like I wasn't a daughter. So I wasn't terrible and I wasn't a daughter. So one of the things about narcissism is the absolutely inaccurate reflection. So anyway, it's just an extra layer for me. And just to let everybody know that like it doesn't matter what your gender is, or even if it's changing around or whatever, if you resonate with this, this is the place for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, we're expanding our definitions of gender anyway, but there does tend to be this sort of very particular relationship between narcissistic moms and narcissistic daughters. But that's not to say that narcissistic daughters, no, non-narcissistic daughters.
Well, that too, but that's another episode.
That's a whole other podcast.
Multi-generational narcissism.
But I do think that, I've already heard from a lot of people who, it was their father who was a narcissist, or it was their whatever, that this resonates with them, right? So I think that, as we said in the first couple episodes, like if any of this resonates with you, like we want you here, like welcome to the tribe. Sorry you're a member, but we're here for you,
Yes.
So
yes, the consolation cookie and the celebration cookie.
Yes. We have coffee in the back. So this week, unlike all the other weeks, we are tackling a pretty heavy duty topic.
For once.
We today are going to talk about grief, but we're going to talk about grief. We're going to sort of go over the traditional definitions of grief, or, ways that we've been taught we're like finger quotes supposed to grieve. But then we're also going to talk about how it's really different with a narcissistic or toxic parent, and that it's not just when they die, which I think is a really, really key thing here, and was something that was really important for me to learn as I was going through therapy, is that there are things you grieve even if they're still in your life. So we're going to talk about that as well. So before we talk about sort of the particular type of grief, like Elizabeth, do you want to tell us a little bit about the different types of grief, and a little bit about how we usually like traditionally define how we're supposed to react to grief?
Yeah. What's normal? Look, if what happened to me was normal, then maybe my grieving would be normal.
That's a really excellent point. It's a really excellent point.
I know for me, part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this now is because, in March, my mom passed away. And so even though like I've been going through this grief process for a really long time, it had this whole it felt like a real deep change. And one of the things that I really, really realized maybe in the last week, actually, is that the truth is that I've been grieving my whole life.
Yeah.
And that in a way, I don't need to grieve anymore. I don't have to make myself small in these really subtle ways. And in some ways, the pain is over because she can't cause me any more pain that's like new,
Yeah.
except for the lies that I'm finding out that she told about me. But
Right.
those aren't so much like painful and make me sad as they really make me angry and then also really feel vindicating, right? For my inner experience,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. You know, I think that, my mom passed away a couple years ago. And I think the primary thing that I felt when she passed away was relief. And that's so hard to talk about in polite society, with people that don't have this kind of understanding of this kind of parent. I mean, and I had been no contact with her for at least 25 years at that point. Even so, the way that I felt what you just described of like, she can't come after me anymore, she can't cause new pain was, I mean, again, just such a relief. I felt it in my body. I felt things relax. I felt things untwist and unwind that I didn't realize I'd been, holding tight for my whole life, really.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. Well, we're getting into the later part of the episode. Let's pause for a minute. I'm going to backtrack us.
Great.
So we're going to talk about sort of what we've learned about grief, sort of the quote unquote normal types of grief and responses to grief. And then let's go into sort of how it's different for people like you and me and all of the other terrible daughters. So there's these sort of four different types of grief, right? That normally we're, when they've done psychological research, they've identified. The first one is anticipatory grief. So that's when we grieve a loss before it's happened. So like when something's coming to an end, like, you're about to graduate from college and you're going to miss the experience, right? And so you're sort of starting to grieve. And then there's common grief, which is what we usually think of as grief, like someone passes away or something. And those are those stages of grief that people have heard about, which is shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. And we're not going to go into those here. There's plenty of information about what each of those stages are and all of that. We can put a link in the show notes. And then there's persistent grief, which is when intense grieving lasts past a year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And sort of, you had some interesting thoughts about like what that really is. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the main one we're going to talk about is complicated grief. And this is when someone grieves in an atypical way. Like you're not going through those stages we just talked about. You're not necessarily sad, or if you are sad, it's not about the loss of the person or whatever. It's about something else, And this is exactly what it's like having an abusive or toxic parent. Both while they are alive, you're experiencing complicated grief, and also after they die. Complicated grief is what we're going to be focusing on most today. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Just that the complicated grief is relatable content.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like one of those things where, I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode is because I always felt, I don't even know, like somehow like guilty that I wasn't grieving right because I wasn't doing the like common grief with the stages. Do you know what I mean? Not guilty, that's the wrong word, but just like a freak, right? Or like people wouldn't understand me. And so, I wanted to share this to really explore that there are these other kinds of grief that are probably going to be more what it looks like when you have a toxic or an abusive parent, and that it's okay. It's actually normal for this situation to grieve in this, like, quote unquote, atypical way is actually normal for this type of grief.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk about, we sort of brainstormed some types of grief that can come up when you have a toxic parent. And so I think the main one is the grief of not getting the love that you needed or deserved and continuing to not get it, right? It being something that happened when you were a child and also something that continues to happen, your whole adult life as well.
Because they don't change and they don't grow, right? Some parents, like, they do, whatever it is, either they get sober or they go into therapy or something like that. Sometimes they do kind of come back to their kid and be like, look, I was not the best parent and I'm really sorry. But it is this terrible combination of the history, all of those times where you didn't get what you needed in a profound way, right? Not just like a little like, it's not like in Adam's Family Values where, she was like, I was a ballerina Barbie and they got me, this other Barbie, that's not it. It's like this chasm, right, between
Yeah.
what you're getting and what you're needing. And that's, day to day to day to day to day. But then it's also that as a grown up, you're just still not getting even an iota, of what you need.
And a lot of times it comes with these sort of like empty declarations that they have changed and they have apologized. So, like, I've apologized to you so many times, and yet you won't forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, I mean, your apology is one thing, but you're continuing to do the same behavior in between these apologies. So, if an
Mm-hmm.
apology isn't coupled with an actual effort to change or understand, then, fuck your apology, really. Like,
Right.
like
Right. Yeah.
you can't just apologize. Like, it's not enough to just say, I'm sorry. You have to say, I'm sorry, and actually make an effort to change. And because of the nature of personality disorders, narcissists are almost unable, I won't say unable, but in most cases, unable to make the changes needed to actually like put some actions behind the words of I'm sorry. But they believe that they've changed, right? So it's this also like another layer of gaslighting where like they're like, but I've changed. I've done this, that, and the other thing. And you're like, oh yeah, no, that's not no way, that's not what you think it is?
Well, that was also a real wake-up call for me was, yeah, I was, reading some clinical stuff about narcissism, and they were like, narcissists can feel regret, but it doesn't translate into action.
Mm,
They can regret until the cows come home and they don't change. And then it's like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, this is what's been going on, right?
I
Yeah.
mean, I think that what it is like, regret in most people, there's an element of feeling badly about yourself and having that be like an impetus to want to change your actions. Like you don't want to hurt someone again, right? If you
Yeah.
hurt them in the past.
Yeah.
But because at the root of narcissism is this intense defensiveness against any kind of shame or any kind of feeling like it's this thing of like, if they felt the shame for an instant, it would be overwhelming, right? They can't handle it.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, there's probably a regret, but it doesn't actually go as deep or hit the same way as it probably does for other people, right? It's a little more surface and it's probably very easy to like turn it around and be like, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that way, but you shouldn't have done this, right? I mean, there's
Mhm.
sort of this immediate pivot to defensiveness.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm just remembering like my mom when I was in family therapy with her, because I tried everything before I went no contact, and family therapy was one of the things.
We do.
And one of the incidents that I brought up to her was when I was applying to medical school. I didn't end up going, spoiler alert, but I had excellent test scores and good grades and all that stuff, right? Because it's perfectionism. And I had been invited to interview at I think two or three different medical schools. And my mom said to me, well, your test scores may be fine and your grades may be fine, but the second that you walk into the interview, they're going to take one look at you, and there's no way anyone could imagine you would be interested in health.
What the fuck? Wait, what? I'm sorry. I even like the the first half of that sentence, even before I knew what the end of that sentence was, which I can barely take in. What mother should say any of that to their kid?
Right. Well,
Oh,
wait, we haven't even gotten to the regret part of the story or the
oh
lack
shit.
thereof. And so I brought this up in family therapy as like something she'd said that was hurtful. And she said, well, maybe that was the wrong way to phrase it, but I was really just trying to encourage you to lose a little bit of weight. And I was like, so you can see the glimmer of regret there. Like she knew what she did wasn't right, but there's no way she was going to let it sink deep enough to actually change her behavior or change her
Hmm.
thoughts about it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh,
that's sort of how a narcissist processes regret. So when they apologize, like that apology she gave me was, I mean, it was a non-apology, right?
I can't help but think kind of developmentally because it's like, what you were talking about your mom, that the spirit of what she was saying, right? And the premise, right? That like what you look like matters more than, right, what you want to do in this world,
Right.
right? That's like the spirit of it. But I'm hearing that like for her, it's like this literal, like, I don't understand any of that stuff, but I understand about like behavior that people don't like. This is like the one part I understand. And that feels really like concrete and really like developmentally young, right?
Yeah.
Immature.
Yeah. So that's one type of, sort of the aspect of grief is not getting the love you needed or deserved. There's not a moment where the parent ever says like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was not the greatest parent to you when you were a little kid." The second one that we talked about was not knowing how to feel loved. It's like I was talking to a client of mine the other week, and she also has a narcissistic stepmom. And we were talking about it sort of being like the difference between being a native speaker of a language versus like learning it. There's that window, right? So, like between the ages of like 0 and 3, if you learn a language or multiple languages, you're a native speaker, right? It sort of wires into your brain as a native speaker. But if you learn it when you're older, even, as a little slightly older kid or as an adult, you can be fluent, but you're never going to quite be native, right? It doesn't quite ever wire into your brain the same way. And I think the same thing is true with children who've grown up with narcissistic parents and the ability to feel loved or to know what love feels like. You didn't get it between the ages of 0 and 3. And so when you later learn it through your friendships or your relationships, you're still always like a fluent speaker, but not a native speaker. And what that means is it's like you're always like if you were, a fluent speaker of a language, you might stop every now and again and be like, is that the right conjunction of that verb? Or maybe you'd speak a little more formally than native speakers, right? Because you learned it from a class and not, from being around people. And it's
Hmm.
the same thing with love. You're like, for me, I'm always like, is that normal? Like, is this how people love each other? Like, every now and again, I still
Yeah.
sort of have these thoughts. Is that toxic or is that okay? Right? Like, is it too much for me to ask for this? Or is it silly for me to ask for this? Or is it abnormal for two people to be this way in a relationship? It's like I'm this person who had to learn these things later in life. And as much practice as I get with them, I'm never going to be a native speaker of what it's like to give and receive love. And that's something I feel like people who have had, like, I'll call them proficient parents. I mean, maybe not even the best parents, but just parents that like were able to love them, attached to them, don't understand. It's sort of this like proficient parenting privilege that you don't even know you have. And so when I'm trying to explain to someone that I don't fundamentally understand, like in a native way, what it means to receive love, it's like they don't even know what I mean. They can't even conceive of that.
Yeah. Yep. 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 I totally relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like sometimes it's like a body feeling or something like that. I don't know what it is, but like I'm thinking about some people in my practice where like there would be some people that would come in and they would have things to work on, but I'd be kind of like, why are you here? Like you're kind of fundamentally okay. And that's just because they don't have trauma. Like they're working on something else like
Yeah,
depression or whatever, but like they have a good family and like they, you know what I mean? And then, then there's the people that come in and like, I recognize you, right? Even if
yeah,
I don't have all the family history or whatever, it's like, I get it. I get why
yeah.
you're here, you know?
I mean, I think that this particular thing of that, like not getting an idea of what love looks like this young is one of the reasons that we sort of find each other. We trauma people sort of find each other. I think it is one of the main pillars of commonality of like energy or way of looking at the world or being in the world that we tend to sort of, recognize each other, right? Or are drawn to each other. I think it's this in a lot of ways, right? Where we are foreigners here. We are
Yeah.
foreigners in this
Yeah.
land of people who know how to be loved, know what it's like.
I also feel like I didn't know for the first several decades of my life that what I was feeling was grief. And I think there's a bunch of layers to that. But one is that there's no one to pick you up if you fall down.
Yeah,
So these feelings of sadness or despair or loneliness or whatever, you just can't afford to feel them, right?
right.
Because, I remember I was part of this workshop that was doing like performance art or that kind of a thing. And I was sort of like, moving my body and kind of exploring. And I got kind of down on the ground and it felt like, sounds terrible. It felt like I was a corpse, right?
Mm.
And I was just, feeling it and kind of just like, okay, well, what does this feel like? And then like I just started
Mm.
just sobbing, and just this despair and, just all of these feelings came up. And I was like, my late 20s, right? And I was so surprised. I was like, I don't know where this is coming from. Like, I'm really surprised. And it was just that I just couldn't ever afford to feel it, ever.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I learned that when you are feeling grief, when you are sad, you go off by yourself and you close yourself in a room and you're allowed to cry, but only not in front of anyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, my parents, if I was ever got upset about something when I was a kid, they would send me in my room. They'd say, come back when you're able to talk about this in a rational way, is what they'd say, right?
Mm,
So I learned that there was this whole set of emotions that is not okay to feel with other people present. And
yeah.
so it took
Yeah.
me until I was an adult to realize, like, oh, if I'm upset about something and I cry in front of someone else, they'll comfort me. And that actually feels really good. Again, something that most people learn when they are an infant took me until I was in my 20s to figure out. Right.
Mm,
And so that's sort of, again, what I mean about these things that are just native to other people. They just know them, that you
yeah.
have to sort of learn. I want to talk about, and you mentioned it, so I would love to ask you. I want to talk about the grief of cutting off parts of ourselves. And you mentioned when you were talking about your mom passing away, all of the ways that you had been small,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that that's a different way of saying the same thing, right? Cutting yourself off or making yourself
Yeah.
smaller. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like some examples of that or what you mean?
Well, I don't know if I can kind of answer it directly the way that you're asking, but when I was sort of
Demand
doing,
answers, Elizabeth. No, I'm just kidding.
well, I'm used to that. Off the cuff, how dare you? That's too dangerous. So I was sort of, because I've had to do inner child work for decades, right?
Yeah.
So, and this also kind of goes back to something that you were saying about this relief when they're gone. And what was happening for me was that, my inner child just couldn't believe it. She was like, no, 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 no. She's going to come back. Like, this is not like, no, she's not really
It's
gone.
a horror film where you think the killer is dead, and then everybody's like,
Yes.
"Ooh, thank God that's over." And then in the background behind them, you see them rise up.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so, my therapist was working with like, okay, so no, like tell her, like, and it's like, does she believe you and all this stuff? So I was working through it and I was like, no, 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 like she's really gone. She can't hurt you anymore, whatever. So I kind of have this image of like this, this inner child in the shadow, right? And I'm like out of the shadow, but I'm like, no, it's okay. Like you can, you can come out.
Yeah.
And I could it was weird. It was like I could feel her relax, but it wasn't that she stepped out. It was actually what she did was she let me see. Oh, this is terrible. It's like the darkness opened up and I could see all of these other inner children that
Mm,
I didn't even know was there. And it's like, and this is like as a professional, right? I'm a mental health professional and also someone that this is not my first rodeo with grieving parts of myself and, all this stuff. So, I mean,
yeah.
I've been doing it for a long time. So just this like, yeah, not I'm going to come out in the darkness, but now that we're safe, I'm going to show you all of this stuff that it wasn't even safe for you to know
Yeah.
as the grown up.
That's really interesting. I have also had that experience since my mom died of being able to access memories of things that were particularly
Yeah.
terrifying and violent that I just had like walled off. You know what I mean? Like I just had
Yeah.
it was too much for me to process through those while also processing through the real fear of her being alive and being around. And I mean, she, even after I went no contact, she would track me down. I would very intentionally not
Yeah.
give her my address or my phone number or anything. And she would, find me somehow, right? She would,
Mm-hmm.
find me on the internet or whatever and would either she would call or she would have some of her flying monkeys contact me and tell me what a terrible daughter I was and how much I was hurting my mom. But yeah,
Yeah.
same thing. There was this like not only like cutting off parts of myself in terms of sort of playing small in the world and like making sure that I was very careful about like who had my phone number, who had my email, that kind of thing. But also like literally cutting off memories, or
Yeah.
cutting off aspects of myself.
Yeah.
And there's a huge grief when that comes up, right? Of like, oh my God, I had to hide that from myself. That's incredibly sad, you
Yeah.
know? I
Yeah.
couldn't even, it wasn't even safe to know myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because we're talking about playing small, but I think it's also playing big or playing strong, right? Where it's like when she was alive, I had to hold myself. And similar to what you're talking about, but like this giant military corset. Even no contact, I had to be ready at a moment's notice, right? To
Yeah.
handle whatever was going to come my way.
And even, I mean,
Um,
after my mom passed away, even little things like I could answer any phone call from any number.
Ooh,
Like, I mean, I used to never answer calls from a number that I didn't know.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
would miss calls from like doctor's offices or whatever because like there is absolutely no way I'm picking up the phone if it's not a number that I know. So even just little things like that, like, oh, I can answer the phone now. The worst thing it's going to be is some spam call or something, right? So, yeah, I think that
Mm.
there's a lot going on there. I want to talk too about this idea that you introduced me to a couple weeks ago that has been just like blowing my mind since then,
Oh.
which is this idea of functional loss. And I think a
Mm.
lot of what we've talked about so far is functional loss. So there's like the actual loss of the person when they die, right? That's sort of what we
Yeah.
think about with loss.
Yeah.
But functional loss, correct me if I'm describing it wrong because you introduced me to it, but it's like I had a mom, like she existed, but she didn't function as a mom in any way,
Mm.
shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so it was like I had to grieve the idea that I was ever going to get to have a loving and supportive mom, even
Yeah.
though she was still alive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's this weird thing where it ends up causing this like opposite universe problem where when she died, people were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I was like,
Oh,
"Actually, no, what I needed was that I'm sorry while she was alive. Now I'm relieved, you know?"
yeah. Yeah.
I was grieving more when she was alive than I am now in the sort of the in terms of the like typical type of grief, right? The sadness and the feeling of loss and the feeling of like I'm never going to have this again, that kind of thing that we think about with loss.
Yeah.
And there was some of that after she died. I was like, wow, now I'm really, really never going to get to have the experience of having a biological mom.
Yeah.
But I think that, this idea of the functional loss and this idea of grieving while the person's alive, but grieving the fact that they're never going to be like even just a basically proficient version of what you need as a parent.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going to be harmful.
It's in some ways worse than if they were dead or just non-existent because you're also having to like fight all the damage that they're constantly trying to inflict on you. It's not just you're not getting anything, it's also you're getting hurt at the same time.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's so touching for me about the functional loss is the, in some ways, the context. One of my beloved therapists, taught me about this, and I think we were talking about Mother's Day, and she was like, you know what? This is really hard because, when someone dies, it's acknowledged, like people know what to do, but you have all of this grieving, but in society, there's no way to say, yeah, my mom's alive, but I don't have a mom. No one really knows. I mean, except for us, right? No one really knows what to say
Right.
about that. And she was saying, she actually like gave me, I can't remember what the resource was, but she was just like, you know what? Like there's some people who also don't have moms, basically,
Yeah.
they've got moms in bodies, right? But not in their heart or their spirit or whatever. And these people get together, right? They get together on Mother's Day and they're with each other. And so it was like, also really like the first time someone acknowledged to me that what I felt was grief and that was legitimate,
Yeah.
you know. And this thing about how we get so caught up in whether a person is alive or dead, and that's
Mm.
like the end all be all. And actually, now that I think about it, in some ways, it feels like it really kind of mirrors the narcissist because, like, I remember, like, all my mom cared about was your seat in the chair at Passover. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
didn't matter, if you were fully alive or if you were emotionally present or anything like that. It was like, was your body there?
I had a tradition with a friend of mine that we've been doing for years of on every Mother's Day, we would get together and go out to brunch, as people generally do on Mother's Day. But we called it, I had to be my own Mother's Day,
Absolutely.
like, because we wanted to mark the occasion in some way, because otherwise, you need company, you need compassion, you need someone who gets it on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to do it in like a sad way. So we would just go have drinks and like eat lunch and like. And I would also always buy myself a nice gift on Mother's Day. I would take the money that I would have spent, buying my mom
Yeah.
something, and I would buy myself flowers or I would buy myself
Mhm.
something, right?
Yeah.
But to someone who didn't understand looking from the outside, they would be
Oof.
like, how selfish,
Right.
you know?
How cruel.
How
Right.
cruel. Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting position to be in. And I think that it is absolutely invaluable at times like that to have a group of people who are in a similar position and who understand, which is one of the reasons we wanted to start this podcast is we want people to have, even if it's just listening to us, but we're really hoping that like a real community can sprout
Yes.
from this. But even if it's just putting this podcast on and listening to Elizabeth and I say, like, you are not the crazy one
Yeah.
and you are absolutely not selfish. In fact, go ahead and buy yourself some flowers and like whatever. Like, you absolutely deserve that
Yeah.
more than anyone else on this planet. So
Yeah.
I think it's vital to sort of have community at those times.
I just had this amazing idea, which is that we send each other flowers. Not just you and me, but like once we like kind of like get people together, like maybe
Yes.
we can do that, find a way to like do something private, so people's privacy, but like wouldn't it be great like if you
Yeah.
just, on Mother's
Because
Day, like you
you know
got some
what?
flowers?
I could absolutely write a very heartfelt and appropriate card to someone who I didn't even know, just knowing they had a narcissistic mom. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would know exactly what to write. It could be like a really good thing to sort of have like yeah, I love that idea.
Hmm.
Okay, so we usually end the episode with a mini crazy mom off where we tell stories of crazy shit that our moms did. I realized that the last couple episodes we actually haven't crowned a winner. It's but I
That's
think
because we're both losing, is what it
we're
is.
losers, depending on how you look at it.
Okay, we're not losers. We're not
Uh,
losers. Cancel, cancel. But yeah, like who wins in any of these stories?
I know, right?
Jeez.
I have one that I've thought of. Do you have one, or do you want me to go first?
I do. You can go first if you want, but I do have
Go
one.
ahead. Yeah, no, I want to hear your story.
Whew. All right. Okay. So there's two creepy parts because I was thinking about Mother's Day. So for years and years and years, my mother would get me a Mother's Day present
Before or after you had your own children?
before.
Okay.
This is before. So she would say, I'm giving this to you because you're like a mother to your clients and whatever. I was like, well, that's wonderful. Like, oh, okay, great. I knew also secretly it was like, I am insisting that you behave like my mom, or like I want you to be the grown up, in the
Yeah.
situation. And so like I'm basically pretending that you're my mom and
Right.
I was like, don't feel great about that, but I'll take the other thing. Okay. When I got pregnant, my mom, I don't remember if it was which Mother's Day it was, right? It could have been the first one after I had my baby or before. And then she was like, I'm so glad that you're finally a mom. I had been giving you Mother's Day presents for years and years, just hoping that you would get the hint that, to have a kid. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
Fuck you. You just
Wow.
ruined this thing that I thought was a kind thing. Oh my God, you should not
About
have told
making
me
it
that.
all about yourself.
Fuck yeah. What? Anyway, I'm just,
I think that that
yeah.
hits on a key thing that
Oh,
especially your mom did. Absolutely.
oh,
Like more than almost anyone I know. But that narcissistic moms do all over the place is this, I'm going to give you something, but it's really, well, A, it has more strings attached than you'll ever
oh,
know, right?
yes.
But B, it's really just so that I can look like a good person
Oh,
doing
yeah,
something nice for you. And that a lot of times there's like an ulterior motive there as well,
absolutely.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
somehow a scheme to get something that they want, which is exactly what this was. Your mom was,
Yeah.
scheming.
Well, and I also think that it's a very subtle thing that I'm just really figuring out, which is this has nothing to do with my child, but like I actually think that one of the real reasons why she wanted me to have a kid was because she hated being a mom. And I think she hated seeing the freedom that I had in my life and also this sort of like, because if it was about her, this implication that, like that she had made a mistake in her life. I think she wanted to see me suffer and struggle
Yeah.
being a parent. I
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot. I don't have kids, but I've heard a lot of my friends who had narcissistic moms who have kids, and
Mm.
their mom said something to the effect of, like, oh man, you're in for it if your kid's anything like you, woo, or something like that, right? And then as the
Hmm.
kid grows up, they're like, yeah, they're exactly like me. And they are this amazing, fantastic human that
Yes.
I just love giving love and support to, right? Like,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that really kind of broke open this thing about, cutting off my mom because I just, I would be in these same situations and, my kid would be doing the same thing or feeling the same thing that I had experience. There's no way on earth that I could respond to this child the way my mom responded to me. And it was so easy for her. It was so easy for her to be cruel and
Hmm.
destructive and punitive. And it was like, and I mean, I was just, it was re-traumatizing because it was like, oh no, now I really get a sense about how unconscionable, to be perfectly
Hmm.
honest, you
Yeah.
know, just terrible.
Yeah.
So
Oh my
anyway,
goodness.
yeah,
Your mom.
I know. What a
She
bitch.
was very adept at hiding her selfishness behind
Ugh,
quote unquote acts of generosity.
I know.
You
I
know,
know.
like she was really a master at that. I've always said about my mom, but I think it's true about your mom too, that like if they'd somehow been able to like harness their mental illness in a different way, they would have made the most amazing PR and spin doctor person. Like
Yeah.
they could
Yeah.
spin anything to make themselves look either good or like the victim, you know?
Yeah.
Anything. Anything. Oh, I started a nuclear war? Well, it was only because this other country did this to me.
Yeah, totally. Let's wag this dog.
Mm-hmm,
Mm,
exactly.
mm.
Okay, my story, you know this story, but I just felt like it was too perfect for the grief episode not to share,
Ah,
which is that, okay, so my mom passed away a couple years ago, and I hadn't spoken to her for about 20, 25 years before then. I did go see her in the hospital and had one last visit with her, but she passed away, and then there was like, the will came out or whatever. And my mom didn't leave any money to her children. She did leave a little bit of money to her sister, which was good. Her sister had stood by her whole life and taken care of her. So I'm happy that her sister got some money. But the majority of the money, so my mom had been a painter her whole life. She painted these giant abstract oil paintings. And she had never found success as a painter in her career, which was, probably, I don't know, 50, 60 years or something of painting. She'd never found success. She'd had a couple shows, but no big success. And she, of course, always attributed it to that she was a misunderstood genius, that she was too ahead of her time, and that people just didn't get her art because it was too advanced for most people to understand, but that, you know, only a select few creme de la creme people would even be able to comprehend her art. And that's why it wasn't popular. So she dies and she leaves a little bit of money to her sister, but the majority of her money she leaves to two things. One, she leaves to storing her giant paintings, which are like, I don't know, how big were her paintings? Like 12 feet by 10 feet. They were enormous
yeah, some of them were, yeah.
in like an art storage facility. So these are places that are like perfectly climate controlled and perfect temperature and, blah, blah, blah. So expensive places, right? So having her art stored definitely in one of those places. And then the other part of the money went to hiring a curator from LACMA, LA County Museum of Art, which is a big mucky muck museum. This is like a world-class museum. So hiring a curator from LACMA to continue to try to find her art shows posthumously. So basically to continue to try to get her work the renown it deserved during her lifetime, but that she was never able to achieve. So that's where
Whew.
she left the majority of her money was to those two things. And I was having a conversation with you about this about a month after she died or a couple months after she died. And you all of a sudden said to me, you realize that she left all of her money to herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really had to stop and be like, oh my God, she did. She found a way to leave all of her money to herself.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if ever there was like a more narcissistic thing, it is to cut out your children and leave your money to yourself.
Well, and the other thing is like I think that there were a couple of ass kissers who she could have left some money to. She didn't even leave money to them. You know what I
No,
mean?
no. Yeah, none of her flying monkeys got any money.
And what
So
a waste. Her art was terrible. It got worse as it went on. I did like some of her paperwork, but like her paintings were just, and I just remember being a kid and just being like, I don't understand what's so great about this. Like, I just,
I will just pause this to say Elizabeth has a degree from Rhode Island School of Design in Art. Like she knows what she's talking about. Like this isn't just like
I do.
she knows the theory, she knows the history, she know like this is coming from someone who knows their shit.
Thank you.
Um, I didn't like it either, but it was always really hard for me to separate my feelings about my mom, who I hated, from her art, partially because her art was what took away all her attention. Like one of the reasons I didn't have any time with my
Mhm.
mom is that she was in her studio all day. I was alone in the house most of the time, and she was out in her studio, which was in our backyard. And so, it was a big part of what took mom away from me, right? Was her spending her time on her art.
Well, okay, let's be real though, Megan, because you did have time with her 5 days a week when she took you to school.
Until I was 14. And then, but actually I didn't because I was in carpools all of my life. So I think like one day a week she was the one who
Oh,
like
of course.
was picked up.
Yes, of course. Well, and that's that gives you a whole nother layer, right? Which is like she didn't actually drive you. First of all, I know she didn't drive you wherever you wanted because one of the things about narcissists, they do all of these subtle things so that you don't ask for shit, right?
Right.
So it's like,
Totally.
like I have like 1,000 things that I've never bothered to ask you for. What do you mean you've given me everything that I've ever
Right.
wanted?
Right.
No.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
anyway.
Oh my God.
Jeez,
Oh my
jeez.
God.
I am not over this thing about your mom refusing to drive you to school.
And I am super appreciative that you continue to be angry on my behalf
Yes.
because like it feels so good.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still not over the quote from who was it, Lincoln, in your bathroom? Like
Thomas Jefferson, renowned pedophile.
Jefferson, like wildly
And slave
inappropriate.
owner.
So inappropriate.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
and just how creepy your childhood bedroom is. I am still not over that. I've been thinking about
I
that since you
just
talked about it.
yeah.
Oh God, I can't. I'm so sorry you had to grow up in this thing that had like horror movie, weird, creepy Chucky vibes your whole life. Like that's just wrong.
I'm thinking
Um,
about making a horror movie video game where it's basically like, you're in my childhood bedroom, try to do something. Like try to touch
like
something
like
or open a
sleep or anything. Yeah. Try to get
or
under the covers without moving the covers at all.
try
Oh
to
my God.
try to play with a toy. Nope, that's not for touching. Like just actually, I mean, you've got a point about the like blankets and stuff. I'm just oh no.
I don't know this for a fact, but I will say with almost 100% certainty that A, you had to make your bed every morning, right?
Oh
That
yes.
absolutely no way you could have left your bed, just like hopped out of bed and left it. And B, and again, I don't know this, I'm just guessing that when you did make your bed, there was some anxiety there about like whether the pillows were all in the right place and if the covers were lined up and if it was like done properly.
Absolutely. If there was a wrinkle, my mom would
There was
make
a
me do it
wrinkle.
all over again. And then she would have the housekeeper make it again. And then when I would come home, she'd be like, see, this is how you're supposed to do it. And you made her work harder. You gave her work to do. And it's not even until I'm saying this, I'm like, I did not. That was
Your
you.
your mother is a terrible, terrible person. I'm so glad she's dead.
You know what? I'm not the
Um,
terrible daughter. She's the terrible mother.
she's terrible. All right, so
Hmm.
we want to share a tool or a strategy or something that we each used this week when we were triggered or having a hard time. Do you have one you want to share? Do you want me
I
to share
do.
first? Okay,
I
go
do.
ahead.
And it's really quick, which is I got my hair cut and I got my hair colored. I
It
love
looks
it. And it's so crazy.
gorgeous. I'm
It's
loving it. It
absurd and I
looks
love it.
so
So
good.
it's red
Um,
and purple and blue right now. So
Yeah, it looks amazing. It looks absolutely amazing. And your lipstick matches your hair. I don't know how you did that, but
art
wow,
school, art
kudos.
school,
There you
art
go. It's
school.
an art
That's
degree.
mhm, yep.
That's a good one. That's a really good
Yeah.
one. Mine is a new version of a meditation that I learned this week in my Saturday meditation group. So I've been doing the traditional form of this meditation for a really long time. It's a meditation called Metta meditation, METTA. And it's a traditional Buddhist meditation where the traditional way you do it is you think of someone you love and that's dear to you, and you send them the phrase, may you find happiness and the causes of happiness. May you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And then you think of someone who's like a little bit, farther out of your circle, like maybe it's, your kid's teacher or something, like someone you're not friends with necessarily, but you really want them to be happy and they're a good person, right? And you send them, may you be, happy and find the causes of happiness. May you be free from suffering, the cause of suffering. And you keep doing that, expanding your circle. It can be like the random checker you see sometimes at the supermarket, right? It's just sort of this way to practice expanding your heart and like really sending love and wishes of happiness to everyone. Because, yeah, I don't want anyone to suffer. I want everyone to be happy, right? It's easy for me to send that to people.
Yeah.
And so the version that I learned this week, which I loved, is how to do it to yourself. Because if I just said, may I find happiness in the causes of happiness, may I find freedom of suffering in the causes of suffering, it doesn't really hit. Like I have a hard time feeling it. I'm saying the words out loud, but they don't feel the same way as when I'm saying them about like someone near and dear to me, like my best friend, right? Like that, I can really feel the emotion behind it. When I'm
Yeah.
doing it to myself, there's like too much, probably self-loathing or something that gets in the way, right? Where I just can't seem to feel it. So we learned this new way of doing it, which I absolutely love. And this is you do it to tiny little body parts to start. So
Oh.
you start with like your right ear and you just bring your attention to it. And it's just there being an ear, doing its best job, being an ear. And you just say, hey, ear, may you find ear happiness and the causes of ear happiness. And may you be free from infections or, being cold. Like, may you be free from little ear suffering in your little ear existence. I hope you're having a good ear life and I hope you continue to have a good ear life.
Mm.
And then you do it to your left ear, same thing. And then maybe you do it to your like right eyebrow. Hey, right eyebrow, you're doing awesome. Thanks for keeping stuff out of my eyes. Like, you know,
Yes.
like I hope you're having a good time up there as an eyebrow. I hope you're having a good life. I hope you're free from any kind of suffering or, any of that. And you just sort of go through and you do little body parts, right? Your fingers, your toes, your knees, it can be anything, just little body parts. And so you start at the top of your head and you just sort of go down. I did some external things like toes and fingers, and I did some more internal things like, my liver, like, hey, liver, good job filtering out toxins. Thank you so much. I hope you're happy. I hope everything is good for you in there. Like, I hope you don't get any infections or, there's nothing that's too overwhelming for you today, right? Just sort of sending my body parts this message of meta. And by the time I got down to my toes, I felt love for myself.
Mm.
I felt appreciation for my body and for everything it was doing. And I genuinely hoped
Mm.
that it was that all of these body parts separately, it sort of morphed into this field at some point as I was doing it, where I was able to more effectively feel like, yeah, body, I hope you're happy. I hope that that nothing bad happens today and that you have an easy and lovely day. And it was a really lovely exercise. And it was a way to access a level of self-compassion that I don't think I'd been able to access, at least in that way, before. It was really nice. And, the playfulness and the goofiness is part of it, right? Like, wishing my
Yeah.
ear a little happy ear life, because I think in order to break through things like shame and fear, a lot of times if we bring in play or we bring in silliness or we bring in lightness, like it's a way to shift the energy, right?
Hmm.
So the
Yeah.
fact that it's a little goofy is part of it, right? So yeah, that's my tool today is doing meta on all of your little body parts.
I love it. I just love it. Maybe we can get a link in the show notes. I would love to
Oh, it was just something like orally that my teacher taught us. I don't know. I'll look and see if there's a link online.
Yeah.
But if not, I can record a meditation.
Ooh,
And we can put that in the show. Now, how about that?
that
Put it
sounds
up on my
great.
website.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I love it. All right. So, one of the things that we want to do right as we are saying goodbye is to remind you that we have an email address. We so want to hear from you. We want to hear crazy mom off stories because we want to start, pitting your moms against each other. We want to
Anonymously.
hear
Anonymously. We
anonymously
won't
against each
out
other.
you. We won't out
Yeah,
you.
totally, totally. And parents, other parents or other toxic people. I also want to hear about maybe like how you deal with, Mother's Days and Father's Days, and maybe some ideas about what we can do in 2025, Mother's Day, Father's Day, right? I'd
Yes.
love that. I'd love that. So the email is h2b terrible at gmail.com. So the letter H, the number two, the letter B, and then terrible, TERIBLE at gmail.com. And look, you've been trying to get your mom's voice out of your head for years and years and years. But you know what? Just relax and finally just listen to your mom. She's told you that you've been the villain the whole time you've been alive. So just relax. Maybe she has a little bit of the truth, because if being your true, authentic self means that you are a villain, maybe that's not so bad. Maybe just be the villain.
Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our new podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content.
And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.